Up and wait. Oh, the recording has just started. Um, we're very, very, very excited to have Nia Davenport here with us and to also have Jamar J. Perry. Um, they are both debut authors and they will be in conversation. And again, like most of our sessions before this, it will be very interactive. And it will be a conversation between us who are aspiring to get to where they are right now and yeah, and them to us. So just a brief introduction. Um, Nia Davenport, Nia N. Davenport is a science fiction fantasy author of The Praetorian Trials and its sequel. She attended the University of Southern California and studied biological sciences and theater arts. She also has an MA in secondary education. She teaches at English and biology to amazing students. When she isn't writing, she enjoys vacationing with her family, skiing, and being a huge foodie. She's an advocate for diverse perspectives and protagonists in literature come through. You can find her on Twitter at Nia_Davenport or on Instagram at Nia.Davenport, which I'm sure we'll put those links in the chat, where she talks about binge-worthy TV, killer movies, and great books. She lives in Texas with her husband and kids. Welcome, Nia. We're so excited to have you. Okay, so Jamar J. Perry. Jamar attended Berea College in Berea, KY, studying psychology at first to the excitement of his friends. Understanding that this field was not his true calling, after a year of study, Jamar switched his major to English literature with a concentration in education, where he studied the structure and power of contemporary literature while learning how to teach it to middle and high school students. After graduation, Jamar became a middle school teacher in the Washington, D.C. area, hoping to instruct the next generation of scholars, thinkers, and writers. While teaching, Jamar thought he wanted to be an administrator, leaving his passion for literature behind. He enrolled into a graduate program where he studied educational leadership. After 4 years of teaching and finishing his master's degree, he decided that administration was not his goal in life, as his love for reading and writing would never leave him. He decided to enroll into a PhD program at the University of Maryland, College Park, hoping that he would continue his love for literature and education. While at the University of Maryland, College Park, Jamar's research focused on Black boys, the history of traditional and Black masculinity in America, and racial literacy. With this renewed research focus, he began to write again, writing stories for the type of reader he always wanted to engage, reluctant readers, Black boys who needed to understand that they were magic, that they could also have joy, that they could be vulnerable and emotional, that they could be the hero in their own stories.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that so beautiful?
That makes me, well, hello everyone, but yeah, that makes me tear up a little bit too. Yeah, when I think about it, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna just start there. Why does it make you tearful?
Yeah, it makes me cheerful because it's the reason why I wrote like my debut novel that's coming out February 1st, 2022, Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms. So I wrote that book because of the fact that, you know, I grew up like a lot of Black boys do in America. You know, I grew up where my parents, my mother and my father, they encouraged me to play sports. You know, they encouraged me to be physical. They encouraged me to, not show emotions. They just encouraged a lot of things that were kind of productive to who I was, and it just wasn't me. And so I grew up just doing a lot of things and believing a lot of things about masculinity and about manhood and about Black maleness, that I grew up believing these things, but they weren't a part of who I was. So I always struggled throughout my entire life thinking a Black man is supposed to do this, a Black man is supposed to behave this certain way. But then I realized that I was a Black man and I wasn't behaving in those ways. And so writing became just an outlet, just to kind of think about who I was as a Black man, who I was as a Black man dealing with America. And so writing became just like my outlet to kind of explore these issues of like who I was and what my parents were telling me. And that's how Cameron Battle became a thing, because, and Nia knows, because me and Nia are like really, really good friends, but we talked a lot about this book. We talked a lot about how to plan this book, and we talked a lot about, you know, who Cameron is and what he, you know, exemplifies. And so I wrote this book just an exploration of Black masculinity, but also an exploration of myself.
Mm. That's such a beautiful origin story for the novel. And
Yeah.
also so deeply, deeply needed and important. Like stories of Black boy joy.
Mm-hmm.
Yo, the world needs to see them.
For sure. And then like, and I believe that, you know, you can't really get, because I hear a lot of people saying Black boy joy, but sometimes I think that we can't get to Black boy joy unless we understand what Black boys have been through, and we can't really get there unless we can't really get to joy unless we understand what really struggle is, right? And
Oh,
so throughout the
100%.
book, you definitely get a sense of like him struggling and him going through his emotions and really
Yeah,
thinking about who he is as a Black boy and how does that
yeah,
jive with the world that he lives in, and then how does that jive with the fantastical world too, right? Because it's a fantasy novel, and then we finally do get to see him being a joyful Black boy. So I love,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yes, holding space for both and something that I believe is deeply important. Like thinking through how our experiences, um, there exists trauma in those experiences, but there also
Mm-hmm.
experience moments of exist moments of joy and moments of like beauty and moments of just like being present
Yeah, for sure.
in everything that we are as Black
Mm-hmm.
people in this world. Because obviously our history is not without trauma. Like that's
Yeah.
not something that you can ignore or erase. Yeah. What about you, Nia? What's your origin story for your novel?
Okay, so a lot of different like facets of me and who I am as a reader and like a pop culture like consumer and a huge just like nerd kind of converge to give birth to the blood trials. I know it says the Praetorian trials on my bio, but it got a name change.
Yeah.
So it's the blood trials now. But so
Yeah.
I've always been a really huge science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, epic fantasy, secondary world fantasy, space fantasy, like you name it, across the board. I've been a huge fantasy reader. LP is laughing because me and him talk about this all the time, and he reads so much of my things. So he knows where I'm going.
Mm.
But I've always been a huge speculative reader. And I love the fantastical, and I love those adventures, and I love the conflict. I and just all of it. And didn't really see myself like a Black woman heroine reflected in any of those books, or any of those pages. I don't want to speak too much on that because I know you have a question coming about that a little later. But I never saw myself reflected in those pages to the degree that I wanted to. So at some point, I
Mm.
think it was like my senior year in college, way back when, that's when I first began to say, F it, I'm not seeing it, I'm gonna write it myself. And so that kind of like is what planted the seed to start writing science fiction, fantasy, and making a Black woman the star of the show. And then along the way, the blood trials I wrote specifically because I was raised in the type of household with the type of parents that it was very much like you got to work 4 times as hard to be half as good.
Mm.
You're not bringing home B's. Like you have to be the best. Like you have to be like, top of the class. And like, it was a super like, you have to not only like excel, but you have to go like above and beyond. And I think a lot of that within, I don't, we're not a monolith, so I can't speak for like every Black family or even Black families outside of my own. But I know a lot of that within my particular Black family. I really believe a lot of it goes back to just like our roots and our racial trauma that we've experienced in the past, and still experience to date, and feeling like education and like excellence is the way to fight oppression, even though if people are going to be racist trash, they're going to be racist trash regardless. But I mean, just my parents really, really drove that, narrative home for me that, if, you want to be successful, you have to be 4 times as good. So my main character, Akenna, she grows up just like that. She's in a society that's a little bit of an analog to like the US, as far as like how incredibly racist and oppressive and misogynistic it can be for Black people and for Black women in like particular. And she has
Mm.
this grandfather who has risen to just basically helm the society. And from the time she was toddling around, he told her, you have to be 4 times as like good. And it was never like anything that was up for debate between him and her. It's, I'm the best, you have to be the best. Basically, like, we have to best our peers, and we have to outshine everybody. And because you're a dark-skinned woman in this incredibly racist, sexist like society, um you're going to get shit, and it's going to be like, you're going to live a grueling existence. And to make it a little bit less painful, her grandfather always tells her, you have to be the best, so that, you know, can digest you just a little bit more, even though it's complete bullshit. And she learns that along the way, that I should be able to be unapologetically who I am without having to deal with the other, you know, prejudices. So that's kind of the origin story for the Blood Trials. I wanted to play with my love of like fantasy, and just seeing a black woman in like the role of just like fighting and falling in love, and like being valued for like her intelligence, as well as her beauty, as well as her fierceness, and like her ferocity in like battle. So I wanted to, we need the joy, we need the adventure. I'm a firm advocate of that all of our stories should not be just about our pain and trauma across the board. So I really, the Blood Trials, for me, it was a balance, because I don't think, it's hard for me to really write a black identifying character without some of, you know, our racial trauma filtering through, because it's our lived existence. But so it's kind of like a balance. It's like my main character just having crazy fun with like this magical gift that she has to hide or perhaps die. There's a lot of feuding, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of brawling. But there's also like, she deals with some incredibly weighty issues as she goes on this heroic journey, that also brings in how I felt, I guess, growing up as a black woman in America. And just like all of the, I guess, muck that I, as a child and even as an adult, still have to weed through just to like carve out a seat at the table. And ultimately, for my heroine, that's her goal. Like, she wants her seat at the table, and she's willing to like kick in doors, break the table, burn the world down. And she's like, you're gonna give it to me regardless. So you can die or you can nicely hand it over, but I'm taking it.
That's real.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, because yesterday we got into a discussion about specifically women antagonists, and like the reasons that they became who they are. And we were talking about Cersei, but one of the things was like trying to get a seat at the table, and what you're willing to sacrifice or give up, because in a world that's dominated by men, and for us, especially as a black woman, like in a world that's dominated by race and patriarchy. Yeah, okay, so I have another off the books question, and also feel free to ask each other questions if you have any thoughts, or to add to each other's, you know, conversations and points. What is the thing that you struggle the most with your protagonist?
With I'm sorry, can you repeat the last word? I didn't hear you.
With your protagonist.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I can start there, because I'm still going through it actually. So I'm writing the sequel to Cameron Battle right now with my editor. And so there's this struggle, and I think I struggled with this too when I was writing it alone, and also struggling writing it with my editor as well. There's this notion of, you know, who do we, who's the audience for this book, right? So we know that it's a middle grade novel, and we know that it's a middle grade fantasy, but it's also like, if I put something in there that's important to Cameron, and that's important to his vulnerability, and that's important to the way that he performs his masculinity, it's almost like, well, who's the audience to, and who are we talking to when we send this book out, right? And who do we get blurbs from, and who do we, you know, send this, like, what independent bookstores do we send this to, or what readers do we send this to, because who is our market, right? And I think that what I'm struggling with is not, it's the protagonist per se, but it's also the way that we perceive him. And so in the book, you know, as I said, he's a very vulnerable and very progressive type of boy. So he does have a crush on his best friend, who is a boy, right? And so I'm struggling with like how much to share about that crush, and to share about the love that he has for his best friend, versus how the world will see him, right? And so my editor is always like, you want to cut this down, or you want to cut this out, or you want to, you know, we want to say this for the second book, or we want to say this for the third book. And it's just kind of like, how do we really talk about like masculinity and Black masculinity if we don't really talk about love too. Like that's what progressive and vulnerable masculine is all about. Like how do Black men come to love each other? How do Black men become to see value in each other? And how do Black men become to see family in each other, right? And so that's something that I'm struggling with as I kind of write, that I wrote the first book, and how I'm trying to write the second book is almost thinking about, does Cameron really, is he really progressive? Is he really vulnerable? And if so, how does he show that to his other Black male friends that are in the book? And so that's something that I'm struggling with as I keep writing. And that's something that I think that my editor is always struggling with. She's just always like, she's on the business side of it, right? And so she's thinking about, who do we get this book in front of? How do we make this book? I hate to say this, but how do we make this book like Tristan Strong-esque, right? And it's like, how do we make? But for me, I'm just like, how do we make that book different than what is already out there? Because the market share is going to be the market. So how do we market around the market, right? How do we promote the book around the market? How do we make the market respond to Cameron instead of making Cameron respond to the market? So that is what, I'm struggling. Well, that's what I struggle with my protagonist. I'm just like, get there. But it's always like, no, we're gonna knock you down two steps. But the good thing about, my editor is that, after we talk and after we kind of argue with each other, she usually lets me do what I want. So that's
That's great. Jamar, you've said something that like has struck me so deep. Like, how do you change the market's desires? Because maybe the market's desires is the problem, where there has only been one type of story that has been presented and shown for generations and centuries. And like us pushing back is saying, wait, no, there are other stories that need to be told, because there are other lives that are lived that need to be seen.
Right.
That's beautiful. Nia,
and
what
also
about you?
I'm sorry. And also, you're a $1 billion company, so you can make the market do what you wanted to do.
Come on.
Yeah.
Call it out.
So fortunately, I have like amazingly supportive agent and editor, where they kind of always just get the vision, like the larger vision, even if they need to like tweak something or rein me in, because I can go off the rails sometimes. But they get the larger vision I have for my protagonist and my stories as like a whole. But one of the things I struggle with during my earlier drafts of like the Blood Trials, like I said, I'm a really big fantasy reader, but I'm also a really big reader. I love when there's romance with my fantasy, or romance with my paranormal stories. So I definitely wanted to like bring in an element of that when yes, she does. That's I wanted to bring in an element of that when I was writing the Blood Trials, just because I personally am of the camp where like, but do I really even need to read this if there's no romance going on? But also because just you don't see Black women, especially dark-skinned Black women, just in books and movies. And we rarely get that love interest. You're beautiful, you're desired, like the whole world is falling at their feet over you role. And it's something that infuriates me and pisses me off to no end. And so the very first time I ever saw it, and it blew me away, and it really cemented the fact that I am writing this. L.A. Banks, R.I.P., rest in power. Her vampire huntress legend. It's a phenomenal urban fantasy series that's heavy on the romance too. And she gave me a dark-skinned, fierce Black heroine. And I was like, oh my God, I can do this. Like, this is the thing. But I know one thing that I struggled with was, we also get, as Black women, we also get a lot of crap, like with, the BS, like Jezebel stereotype that has been like, just like rehashed over and over again. So I was like, okay, I want to make my main character, I want to make her fierce, I want to make her sexy, like I want to give her that starring love interest role, but I also want to be careful not to veer into the harmful end of the spectrum. So that's something that I struggled with when I was writing her romantic arc, and just making sure that I walked that tightrope, and that I did it justice. And I wrote it from a place of my heart, and like, this is me, this is what I want to see in a book. So that was one thing. And another thing, Akinna is the protagonist, but once you read the Blood Trials, you can see that she walks a fine line between protagonist and like delving into a villain origin story, because the world basically, the world she lives in like shits on her from beginning to end, and like they do some really incredibly messed up, like heinous, repugnant things to her and her family. And she starts from a place of, I want to burn the world down. And you can almost see her like slipping into like that Anakin to Darth Vader like switch, like with the right push, like everybody got to die now. Like it doesn't matter if you wronged me or not. We all about to feel the vengeance. But I walked that tight rope with her, and I had to keep, you know, reeling her in as a character. Like, yes, you want to burn the world down, but also realizing it's not the entire world's fault. Like, you know, the entire world shouldn't be punished for the crimes of a few reprehensible individuals. So I wanted to go dark with her. I wanted to play with the idea of what makes an incredibly powerful person with almost godlike powers still be human versus being monstrous. And I know there's layers when you consider the fact that she's also a Black woman, and we're playing with this duality of humanity versus monstrosity because she has these godlike powers. And so I wanted to make sure I walked that tightrope too, and always kept her like on the side of right, and like standing on with deeply rooted within her humanity. But she definitely has the potential, you know, to I veer her into villain, and then like I drag her back, and I'm like, but no. I always use, as I was writing it, I always use the Olivia Pope model from I am blanking on the name of the show, but I want to wear the white hat. So like she does some things that are morally questionable, but like she also, you know, drag herself on back on the side of right, because she's like, you know, in the end, I really am fighting for, you know, the liberation of everybody, of an entire planet. And then just the thing that I wanted to make sure that it's so, when you write powerful protagonists, it's so hard to actually give them a flaw and to give them a weakness, but they have to have a weakness in order for there to be conflict and in order to advance the story. So when I first wrote her, she was like this, like kind of like larger than life, all powerful being. And then through several rounds of revisions with my agent and then my editor, it was like, okay, you have to make her vulnerable. You have to, yes, she can be fierce, but you have to figure out a way to, you know, give her some flaws, so that, you know, your audience will connect with her more. So I had to kind of like scale back on, you know, the all nearly godlike powerful trope that I was playing with, and make her actually be just a little bit breakable, and make her be like terrified of things, and, you know, make her grieve and make her lose things, to bring in that human connection.
I love that. There's so many gems there. Like I don't even know where to start. And the funny thing is, I feel like this is, I don't know, divine, and I don't know what it is, but like you also touched on things that we've been talking about the last few days in our workshop. So even like the dark-skinned woman trope and not getting the love that she deserves. We're talking about Lovecraft Country, and you know, how we place dark-skinned women and fat women in story, and even how colorism comes through even in some of the Black works that comes out right now. Yeah, so that's something to bring up. And then we had a Build a Beast workshop taught by one of our faculty, and we're talking about the similarities and differences between antagonists and protagonists, and how they, at the end of the day, they're just people. And so the movement from like villain to hero to villain, I feel like it's very human and very, very resonant. Yeah. Jamar, okay, so you guys brought up publishing in the industry, and I'd like us to like take that route now. I want to know what your life looked like during writing and querying the novel.
It was, I mean, the term like quarry trenches is actually a pretty apt term. It was a period where I was terrible at self-care, and since then I've learned to be a lot better and to like carve out, you know, the self-care moments. But the blood trials, I actually didn't query the blood trials. The blood trials I wrote after I signed with my agent. But the novel I queried to sign with my agent was a YA contemporary fantasy. And it was, I believe, like the fourth or fifth novel that I had wrote, and I think it was the third one that I'd queried. And it was, by the time I was querying, I had slipped into almost this. I have to be very careful because I'm the type of person where once I set a goal, I become so laser focused on it. Almost it becomes like a negative attribute because I literally neglect everything else going on around me, including my own, like, okay, you actually need to eat and you actually need to hydrate and you actually need to do something other than like slave away at your computer from like sun up to like 4 a.m. and sleep for 3 hours and wake back up. So that's what quarrying looked like for me, and I do not recommend it for anybody because it was terrible, and that's not the way to go about it. And I had to learn it. And if I could do it all over again, I definitely would, make better self-care choices. But yeah, and it was a time where I was quarrying a contemporary fantasy in a market where, like, I guess similar white stories had already saturated the market. So I got a lot of, this doesn't stand out, the voice isn't different enough, which I've talked about this before. I think that voice rejection is always just complete BS because, when I'm a marginalized person, specifically a person of color and specifically a Black person, like, I just feel like that's a terrible like way to phrase a rejection, that I didn't connect with the voice or the voice won't stand out. Because I'm like, how many stories do we really have? How many Black fantasies do we really have with, Black women? Of course it'll stand out, but that's not the way publishing sees it. So I got a lot of rejections on, I love the craft aspects, I love the story, but it's not different enough. And then, like I said, my agent Katie Flum, at Liza Dawson Associates, she's incredible, and she was one of the agents that she read the manuscript I queried and she fell in love with it, and she saw the vision and she got it, and she understood what I was trying to do by introducing a Black protagonist into, yeah, maybe a market that we've had a ton of white stories just like it come, but we've had very little to none, stories featuring a Black heroine come like it. So
So I guess I can go now. So querying for me was, so for me, querying wasn't the hard part. It was the getting a book sold. That was the hard part for me. So querying, I came in like right when like the Children of Blood and Bone thing was going on. And so once that became such a huge thing, like I literally was querying like right when that book got announced, like in a multi-million-dollar deal. And so because of that, like agents were looking for like Black fantasies, and specifically Black old world fantasies, like that whole West African type of fantasy. And so I got an agent really quickly. I think I queried for like maybe 3 months, I think, and then I got an agent. So it was really quick. So I don't want people to think that querying is just going to happen for you immediately. But for me, it kind of did happen really quickly, as compared to like my peers who have been querying for for years. Well, as David says in the chat, after that, things just kind of went haywire for me. It took me years to sell a book after I signed with my agent. And I'm no longer with that agent either as well. I'm on my third agent now.
Wow.
I started querying. So yeah, so I think that for me, the lesson within that was, some people are gonna get fast queries and then long waits on the submission train when they submit to publishers, or some people are going to have long query trains and then have a short submission period for when they submit to publishers. Yeah, so for me, I got an agent really quickly, and then after that, it was just waiting and waiting and waiting and more waiting. and going on submission and not hearing anything from editors, or hearing, this story is not right for us, or, we love Jamar, but we just don't love the story. And then it took me, it took me a long time to actually go ahead and get a deal. So trying to query was the easy part. It was just like the waiting that became a thing that like really challenged my anxiety and really challenged like my mental health, because I just kept wondering like, every editors want a certain type of book, they just didn't want me, and so I kind of struggled with thinking that, it was me that they didn't want. And so, but it just took a while for like one editor to finally see what I was trying to do and what I was trying to accomplish with my book. And I'm glad that editor was at Bloomsbury, because it's just really hard to especially it's really hard for Black gay men and Black queer men to actually succeed in this industry, because publishing doesn't look that way, right? And so we're coming up on there's two different fronts that we're combating, right? Like we're combating. I talk to editors all the time about this, and specifically my editor, is that sometimes editors are scared of Black men, number one. And then also the second thing is they don't know what to do with Black gay men or Black queer men. And so those are just two barriers that I've had to come across, like as I've faced the whole publishing landscape. It's just that, so what do we do with this person who's totally different or totally outside the norm? But I always tell them, so what is the norm? What is normal, right? What does that look like when a lot of us are queer? And so we have to be able to think about these things and interrogate these things within ourselves and figure out, is this something that is a thing, or is it something that, or is your bias actually showing? So it definitely can be mentally draining for sure.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about how there's definitely not one version of normal. That doesn't exist. Yeah, because we're not a monolith. That's another thing that keeps being repeated in the space. Not just as human beings, as Black people, we are not a monolith. There's so many different backstories that need to be out in the world, different types of backstories. Okay, so there's so many questions and like conversations going on in the chat about like agenting and querying and okay, so I'm gonna ask, are you happy with the agents you have now? And how did you know that this is the agent for you right now or for this particular story?
I adore my agent that I have now. I gush about Katie all the time. Like I said, she signed me for my YA fantasy, and then when I gave her the Blood Trials, which is what we took to submission after the YA fantasy didn't sell to editors, she was just excited about that. And I think I know that our relationship just works because she shares my passion for the type of story I want to write, which is just fierce Black girls just like fighting and falling in love and saving the world and like slaying the big bad all at the same time. And so every time I give her something new or pitch her something else, she totally gets it. And she's on board because I'm also the type of writer where I don't want to just stick to one age category or one genre. Like I have the adult fantasy coming out with the Blood Trials, but I also want to write in YA. Also, it's my goal to eventually be published in the MG or middle grade space. I love fantasy, but also like to write thrillers. Also like to write rom-coms, and literally Katie is on board for any and all things that I will shoot her a random text or email like, hey, can we do this? And she's like, let me figure it out. But the answer is yes.
I love that.
So me and Nia actually share the same agent.
Hey, come through.
And I'm excited about Katie, and I'm happy to be with her. Like as Nia said, she's just very, very supportive, and just let us do what we want. But then, like, of course, she'll take the book and then she'll she'll edit it and give us edit letters and do line edits and all that good stuff. But like, she doesn't really question the things that we want to write, which is a good thing in order and to have an agent, right? So your agent will tell you the market, but then they'll tell you like, okay, well, you can write it, but these are some of the things you want to watch out for as you write it. But like, it's never been like, you can't write that, or I'm not going on submission with that, or anything like that. She's been very, very supportive in that regard. So yeah, she's been great.
Yeah, that sounds like a happy ending for you, Jamar. hopefully ending. Yes. Hopefully this will be,
because I went through so much crap.
That's real. But like I remember someone telling me because so I'm in an MFA program finishing now, but like I got rejected by 5 different programs before I got accepted into the one that I got accepted in. And someone told me that you'd rather be rejected by the places that are not excited about your work.
Yeah,
You would rather be with someone who is excited about your work because they will be more intentional about investing in your work than someone who's like, "Hmm, I don't know, but we'll accept you because we need space. We need someone else to fill up this space, you know?" So I rejections, when you look at it from that light, rejections are kind of a good thing where like, oh, y'all wouldn't have fucked with my work the way that I need you to anyway. So for it to be out in the world. Um, that's really cool. So what was the hardest part of bringing the novel into the market for y'all? Drafting, editing, revising, querying, going out on submission.
So I think for me, I think the hardest part for me about the process of putting camera out there was the waiting. Yeah, the waiting. Like once I
Mm,
went on submission to publishers, it was the waiting part of it. Um, that was it. Like it wasn't like because once the novel sold and once I got into revisions, it was just like, you know, I was quick with it, and then my editor was pretty quick, and she was very very responsive to like what I needed, and she let me know what she needed from the novel and things like that. So it was just a waiting that like it took, I forgot how many months it took this book to sell, like almost a year for the book to sell. And so just waiting there, you know, that long. And then sometimes you'll go like 2 or 3 months without getting a response from editors at all, like not even a rejection. And so you're thinking about, oh my God, what is going on? And then you start like thinking about, this should be illegal. This is not right. They should not be having us waiting so long for this. And they should not be, you know, it should be something in their contract that say that they have to respond to all submissions within a month or two. And it's just, whew, it was just hard that entire year of just like waiting of, you know, just to get someone to say yes. And so, and then once that
mm,
person says yes, you there's more waiting, right? So once the editor said yes, there's still more waiting because they have to bring it back to their team. And then once the team reads it, the team has to say yes. And then once the team says yes, they have to bring it to an acquisition board that has to say yes, right? And so all that waiting and all that anxiety was just a lot, was too much, I think. But you know, and I remember just thinking that this should be criminal. Like this is a thing where that just should not happen. Like all these, I think that if an editor says they like the book, then that should be it, right? But they have to take it for second reads, and then after the second reads are give it a thumbs up, they have to take it to another board, and after that board gets done, then they have to take it to the acquisition board, and then the acquisition board, and then my publisher, after the acquisition board said yes, I still had to wait. I still had to wait another week, or I can't remember if it was a week or 2 weeks. I still had to wait another 2 weeks in order to get the actual deal in my inbox. So it took, not
mm.
only did it take a year for the book to sell, but also took another 2 months after that. After the editor said yes, it took another 2 months for me to finally say, "Okay, Jamar, you have a deal in your email." So it just took a long time. So that was, the waiting was just a
Yo,
lot.
yeah.
For me, it was all the books before the blood trials that were hard. Things like, it was kind of like Providence, because things kind of like really easily came together. I wrote the blood trials when I queried my agent. She offered me an R&R, which is a revise and resubmit on the manuscript I queried her with. And so I sent that back. And while I was like anxiously waiting on her to read it, is when I started writing the blood trials. And it was kind of a story that was so much a story of my heart and my identity and who I am. And it just embodies so many things I love about science fiction, fantasy, that it wasn't hard to write at all. I think it like a 110K draft poured out of me, I think in like 2 months. Like it just came
Mm,
so smooth. Which, I mean, that doesn't happen with every project, because I'm working on book 2 now, and it's like pulling teeth. But book 1 definitely just poured out. It was hard to get in the headspace to revise it after I wrote it, because then I had my YA fantasy on submission, and we were receiving rejection after rejection, and it was one of those things where I was like questioning if I could even like do or succeed
mm,
at this writing thing. So I was in my own head. So it was hard to actually revise it. I think I set it aside for like a good year while my white fantasy was on submission, and I couldn't like get in the right headspace to confidently work on it and not second guess everything that I was doing while I was revising it. But then I picked it back up a year later, and then I started revising it. And once I, got out of my own way and, got over the anxiety of being on submission with something else, um, the revision part came easy. I always revise once myself before I send it off to my agent for her thoughts. So that part came easy, and then she gave me her thoughts back, and then I implemented her notes before it went on submission to editors, and that came easy. And then the editor, David Pomerico at Harper Voyager, who is brilliant and amazing, and I'm so incredibly thrilled and honored to have landed with Harper, because Harper Voyager seems to be an amazing imprint so far. They're very they're very supportive, and they get my vision. They understand what I'm trying to do with the book, and they're 100% behind it. So he offered a revise and resubmit. There were some things he loved the larger story and the larger things, but there were some like specific plot choices that I made in the draft we sent him that he wanted to, talk about how to shift. So I completed a proposal of actually the revisions I wanted to make, and he bought it off of the proposed revisions. The hard part came when I got my first edit letter from my editor post acquisitions. That was like, okay, yay, this is great, but here's like all of these hefty changes. I'd like you to think about, how you would like tweak and like change. And it was like I was staring down the face of like 150K word doc, and I think I had like 5 weeks to get my revisions turned around. It was something that was just wild, and I was like, how am I gonna do this? Of course, it came in the middle of a pandemic. I had a newborn baby, a toddler, a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old. 2 of my 4 kids were in virtual school. I was like, whoa. I was like, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. But like I said, my agent, she's amazing. She talked me down, and she was like, you can do it. My family is incredibly supportive. I ended up booking an Airbnb for like a whole week and just leaving the house, and taking my laptop and just really like drilling down into my revisions, and getting a good chunk of them out the way. So when I got back home to the hecticness of my family, and the kiddos being at home and not in daycare or school in a pandemic, I felt good and like centered enough to keep powering through, because I had the time to like drill down into the story and get a good chunk of it behind me, without all the other distractions.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that that really pushed me, was the fact that, once the deal was signed and everything else kind of flowed from there, right? And like, so as Mia said, like I had a really, really good publisher who really was really behind me. Well, I do have a great publisher who's really behind me, and they let me make the decisions that I need to make in order to make the book, the book that it needs to be, right? And so like I've just had a really good experience of just, I don't know. And for me, it's not about, because my book didn't go to auction, so there wasn't many publishers vying for the book. But I'm glad that didn't happen, because that one publisher who reached out was just like, we love your book, we see what you're doing here, and we see you as a person, and we see you as an author. And so that really made the difference for me, because not only did I have a great publisher, but I had a great editor who saw something within the book and took me out of those submission trenches after a year. Was like, okay, I see what you're doing, and I really want to help you get this to the next level. So I'm actually glad that I didn't go to auction, that it was just only one publisher, because that publisher is one of the best publishers, I think, for me.
I love that. Okay, so your answers are so full and incredibly filled with like a lot of wisdom that's super helpful for all the writers in the space. And I don't want us to run out of time before guys are given an opportunity to ask you their questions. So I'm gonna ask a question, but I'm also gonna say, if anyone has questions to ask, put your virtual hand up so that I can pick on you after this question. Okay. Or let's just go straight into the questions, since I see a hand up already, Maurice.
Oh, hi. I'm Maurice. I'm new to like writing, so I'm like a visual artist. So I guess querying for us would be applying to residencies and galleries and things like that. And learning more about publishing, like you only apply to one place at a time, and we don't do that in art. I apply to 1,000 galleries and I get 1,000 rejections or what. So it's just like it's interesting. But I wanted to know um, publishing in journals or magazines or zines or like full books, like where do you kind of weigh that?
Do you mean like where do I weigh like what I want to focus on as far as like a journal or a magazine or like a full book or like writing a novel versus like a novelette or a short story?
Yeah, I guess because like I never thought I would write anything because of my
Mm.
neurodiversity and learning disability. So anytime I get a publication where I get someone reading what I wrote, I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. Someone actually wants to read it. So I guess I'm very open to like, if I get a publication, I get a publication. But I guess where do you weigh that in terms of for you all in terms of getting published in academic journals or zines or magazines? Like, how do you all feel about that?
Oh,
For me, it sorry, go ahead.
oh no. So I was just gonna say, like, yeah. So I'm struggling with. Thank you, Maurice, for your question because I, like, as you know, as Shingai said at the beginning when she read my bio, I literally just finished my PhD at the University of Maryland, and so I was thinking about like, should I go into like the academic publishing route, or should I go in the children's market or the book market? And so for me, I definitely weighed the difference between like there's academic journals that I can submit to versus actually querying my novel and trying to get an agent and then try to publish traditionally so that everyone can see my work. And so for me, what stood out the most for me was that I submitted an article to an academic journal, and in the academic world, you can only submit an article one time to one journal at a time, right? And so and then it took them 4 months to finally get back to me, which was a rejection for my academic writing, and I could only submit it one time. So it was like almost half a year out of my life on one article. Versus like when I started writing a book, I could query widely, right? You can query 100 agents if you want to, even though I don't suggest you do that, of course. But you can query as many agents as you want. Agents can start fighting. They can start fighting over you if you get an offer from an agent, and then you can start just like making sure you can start negotiating like what your contract looks like and things like that. So for me, it was just weighing the time that I spent writing an article and then sending an academic article out and then getting rejections on that article half a year later, and I hadn't submitted to any other publication versus querying when I can query, multiple people at one time. And so I definitely chose the book route, not because of it was faster, number one, and also it was writing for children is just something that I want to do. And it's also, if you write an article, it's for the academic world and not many people read it, versus if you have a book in the book world, in the children's world, your market is just it just explodes and everyone's able to read your work. And so I chose the book market for two reasons. First reason was I wanted a lot of people to read my book, number one, and then number two, it was just a little bit faster.
So I think as writers, we have multiple routes that you can take, Maurice. Like you said, we can, seek traditional publishing, or we can, aspire to go to self-publishing route, or we can want to write, novel length works or short stories or novellas and land somewhere in between. We can be looking for publication in like journals or like science fiction fantasy magazines versus being published by imprint. And for me, it was a matter of looking at what my ultimate goal was. And also, I just, LP will tell you, I have tried to write short stories time and time again. And for all of you guys who do it, like my hat is off to you. Like I don't know what type of deep magic y'all work to be able to write a short story and have it come together, for anybody who writes short stories, because I try, and every time I try I feel like I just crash and burn. So as far as trying to figure out if I wanted to write short stories versus focusing on like my novel, I focused on novel writing because it was what I was strongest at. And So I was, and I had limited time because I was also working a full-time job and was raising a family. So I had to, it came down to I couldn't hone my craft in both areas, because I feel like they take a different set of skills, and like a different set of focus. And I would love to be able to hone my craft in both areas and be able to be like all the other awesome people who can write short stories, but I can't. My time is limited, so I don't have the time. So at the moment, um so I definitely decided to focus on writing novels instead, because that's just what I excelled at. It just I've read novels since I've been literally 5, and so like I don't have an MFA or anything, but like intrinsically I feel like I have a really strong handle on like the concept of story and storytelling, and like the like pacing and structure of a novel, because I've been a reader for forever, and I've also been an English teacher for about 5 years. So that was just where my strength was, and so that's why I decided to focus on writing full-length novels. And then I've decided to for my goal to be traditional publishing versus self-publishing, because I really hate when people are like, oh, you should just self-publish, and it'll be easier, because it's not. And it's like, I think people take for granted that when you're indie published or when you're self-published, those writers, they do an incredible amount of work, and they didn't choose the easier path. Like they chose a path that is just as grueling and just as validated, and like if not more so grueling, because you can't I get to just be a writer for the most part, but like self-publishing meant, and I it's something I tried and was like, I don't know that I have I'm equipped with all the tools to successfully do this, because it takes a little bit of privilege too, and like financial freedom, because you have to be writer and publicist, and you have to figure out your own promo, and like how to pitch yourself and how to sell yourself, and like how to get your book in front of like the necessary eyes, and like covers. Yes, I just saw somebody say book covers, editors, like you have to take the helm of all of that. And so I decided to traditionally publish for myself, because I was like, primarily I just want to create, I just want to write.
I love that. Okay, so we have 2 more questions. We might stay a little bit longer, if that's okay with you both. Okay.
Totally fine.
Okay,
Can
cool.
I break in real quick, Shinga? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So usually the way our sessions work, after the recording stops, we just kind of hang out for a little bit. So feel free to dip if you need to, stay if you like to, all of which is A-okay. We just like to process together after the sessions. Also, I'm throwing into the chat signups for Dropping Bars Part 2 in case folks want to add themselves for the student reading. Okay, and I'm leaving now.
Thank you, Opie. Nikita.
Hello, good day. So the question that I have was, how involved were you in picking or requesting cover art, if you were involved at all?
Yeah, so I can go first with that. So, like as I said, like once I got my contract, like my agent was just like, at first the contract was a little shaky, and so like I kind of knew what I wanted, like going forward. Like I was like, I know what I want my cover to look like, and I know that I didn't want trash for my cover, because sometimes that does happen. Because sometimes once you sell the book, you don't get a say. You don't get a say in what your cover looks like. You don't get a say in the cover artist and things like that. Most times you don't. And so, but my agent really did a really good job of like making sure that I got cover consultation, that I was able to pick the illustrator that I wanted, that I was able to pick the design that I wanted, that I was able to pick the sketch that I wanted, and things like that. So I think they knew going in, like once I signed the contract, like my editor knew, like we had conversations even before the contract even got to my inbox. Like we had conversations like, Jamar, so what do you want for the cover, and what do you want it to look like? And I was just like, just as long as it's not trash. And then she was like, what does trash look like? And I was like, well, I don't like this cover, this cover, this cover, this cover. So I was just sending her covers like, this is what I don't want. And so she was like, okay, I think we can accommodate that. And so after that, she sent me a list. And mind you, this hardly ever happens. So don't, so once you get a contract with a publisher, most times they don't let you pick anything. They just do what they want. But like she sent me a whole list of illustrators, and she was like, from this list of illustrators, which one, do you want to illustrate your cover? And I said, none of them. I don't like none of them. And so she was like, well, which, which do you like? And so I sent her, 3 or 4 illustrators that I wanted, and I ranked them from top, from 1 to 4, and they picked number one. Number one was available, so they picked number one. And then so it was 3 phases of the cover process. The first one was the sketch, where the artist just drew it out. And then the second one was when they added color to the sketch. And then the third part was when they digitized it to make it come alive. And so I had consultation throughout the entire thing. Once the sketch came back, there was like 3 sketches, I think, and I picked the sketch that I wanted. And then I said, this is what I want. This is the sketch that I want. This is the colors that I want. And then the digital part, the last part was the digital part of the cover. I didn't like the digital part. So they had to go back and change it all over again, because I was just like, you would not give me a trash cover. Like, you would not put a Black gay boy on the cover and he doesn't look good, right? And so because of that, I was able to, and as you see from my Twitter, the cover is just absolutely gorgeous. Like, the way it came out was just absolutely more than, what I could imagine. And it's just something that's really, really beautiful. So even if you don't get cover consultation within your contract, just make sure that you push the publisher as much as you can. Because, like, as I said, sometimes a publisher will tell you that, you don't have a choice, and then authors will just sit back and they won't say anything. They'll just accept what's given to them. But for me, I was just like, no, I need cover consultation, and I don't want you to just tell me what I like. I want to be able to tell you, like, hey, this is the illustrator that I like, and these are the sketches that I like. And so it really came out amazingly.
Before I speak on that, David, your X-Men shirt, I need it in my life. I'm sitting over here looking at it like, oh, I like it. But yeah, I was really fortunate that, like I said, I landed with a really good imprint with Harper Voyager. Cover consultation isn't anything we even had to ask for or fight for. It's something they automatically put in my contract for me. Which was something that was really cool that they did. And so when it came time to start talking covers, my editor reached out, and he was like, okay, so describe what it is you want to see from your cover and give me a list of maybe like 5 artists that you would.
Yeah, I think you went on mute.
Nia, that was my bad. I was meeting someone else, and I'm
sorry.
That wasn't you. That was me. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So yeah, my editor reached out and asked me for what I wanted to see on my cover, and for a list of about 5 artists that I'd like to have work on my cover. And I know Maurice said that he was a visual artist, which hats off to you on that, because I can't draw my way out of a paper bag. I can't draw a straight line. I can't draw a circle. So I was very frank. I was like, listen, I am not a visually artistic person. So forgive me if I don't use the right terminology or I can't convey what I want well. So I was like, basically, I need a Black woman on the cover. I need her to be dark skinned. I wanted to have a knife. I want her to look like she's about to murder somebody, but also be sexy while she's about to murder somebody. And so that was what I sent over. And so, like I said, me and my editor are normally on the same wavelength about this thing. And he was like, cool, that's about what I was thinking too. And then I pushed for, I gave him a list of artists that who work I admire and thought was so dope, but I really pushed for wanting a Black artist to draw the cover for the Blood Trials, because I thought that was incredibly important, since it's a story about a Black identity and it's written by a Black author, and the heroine is Black. I wanted to have a Black cover artist work on the work too. So we ended up getting Raymond Sebastian, who is phenomenal and amazing, and I admire all the book covers he's done in the past. Kaylin Barron's This Poison Heart, he worked on, and it's amazing. He did Jamar's Cameron Battle cover, and that's amazing. And the Blood Trials cover turned out stunningly gorgeous, and I'm just so incredibly happy with it.
Yeah, we definitely kept it in the family for this one. Me and Nia, like, once Nia saw my cover, she was like, I don't know, I got all these illustrators, who do I pick? And I was like, girl, if you don't pick Raymond, like, so like he did both of our covers, and like they came out great. And another thing too that Nia was talking about that I wanted to touch on before we get to the last question was that, like, I think that sometimes editors, they go straight to the whiteness part when they do your covers. And so, like, my first cover had like a light-skinned boy on there. And I'm just like, wait a minute, like the book is not, he was like white, almost white looking. And I'm just like, wait a minute, this is not, like if you look at I literally gave them descriptions and pictures of what Cameron looked like. And then that's why it was so many revisions. So I was like, no, we're gonna make sure that he's dark skinned.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely here for the dark-skinned Black characters on the covers of books. Okay, that is important. David.
They actually just kind of answered my question, which was going to be about working with other Black people in the industry, like what Black people were on your team, if any, or were there any Black people on your team? And I don't know, skin folk wasn't kinfolk, you know what I mean? Just because they were in this industry and they're Black, did you feel supported or anything like that? But Raymond Sebastian definitely answered part of that question. Was there anybody else, maybe in your editing process or acquisitions or anything?
No, and I think that what happened like with me was that this was right around the time, unfortunately, when George Floyd died, right? And so because of that, publishers were really sensitive to like Black needs and what Black people wanted. And so I don't know if it's the same way now, but back during those times, they always just every decision they were making, they came to us and they asked us, like, we know that we're a team of white people. What do we do about this? How do we do the cover? How do we do the marketing? What does it look like? What does the design look like? Right? How big do we show the face of, you know, the main character on your book? How is it smaller? Is it bigger? Do we show his friends? Like, what does it look like? And so I don't know what it is now, but I know that my publisher is very sensitive to, like, you know, racism and how, you know, editors and publishers can be anti-Black without realizing that they're being anti-Black, right? Just like when I got my first cover and he was light skinned. So it's just like they were very, very, you know, sensitive to the needs of what I wanted. And so I don't know if that is, again, I don't know if that's the same way now, but Raymond was definitely the only Black person that I had on my team.
You caught them when they were feeling guilty.
Right, when they were feeling guilty, unfortunately, yeah.
I actually haven't met the rest of my team yet, so I can't really answer that question. We're still kind of early in my production process with the Blood Trials. So the first like decision that I got to like really be involved with was choosing the cover artist, and we chose Raymond because, like I said, I really wanted a Black artist to work on it. So I haven't met the larger Harper Voyager team that is working behind, you know, in marketing and publicity and, you know, the art department to support my release. So I'm not sure, but I can say like my team has been incredibly supportive. With all of, you know, and they get the vision for the book, and they have been, like Jamar said, very sensitive and very aware, and like every little thing that's being made has been like ran by me. Like, how do you like this typesetting? How do you like this print for like the book? And I don't know if that's normal or not, because this is my first go around, so I have no idea if, you know, these are, you know, things that all authors just automatically, you know, get, you know, a say in. But I feel very grateful, and I'm very happy that I am getting, even if, like I said, I am not a visual arts person, so my feedback is normally like, it's pretty. But I'm at least happy to be able to say it's pretty. I like it.
That's good though. It's good to be supported, even if it's not us. At least they seem to understand.
Right.
So
I will say that one place I found an incredible amount of support from us has been finding a solid group of fellow Black writers. The people over at Fire Magazine, they've been amazing. That whole crew, since I started writing, they've been like an amazing, like, tight-knit community that has propped me up and supported me, and I've been able to go to them. LP is now over here. He's part of our Fire family, but now he's over here with y'all at like Voodoonauts, and LP is always and forever supportive and amazing. He's like the naming guru. Whenever I'm like, I need to name something, I always go to him, and he throws out like all these cool like word plays on like names of whatever I'm working with, and I'm like, all right. So yeah, definitely, like, I just feel like it's most important to like find like that support and like that community, like within like your fellow peers and your writers,
That's
because
good
it
advice.
becomes so important along the way.
Yeah, that's I think I would lead that too. It's just that like, sometimes I struggle with like when you see the big authors, you're like, oh, I want to get in space with them. I want to be in community with them. I want to be in conversation with them. But you definitely want to make sure that you have a group of people that you came up with, right? Because you'll never get into that space of like the big Hollywood stars, the big Hollywood writers, because you're not there yet, right? And so that's why having me and Nia have been friends for like 4 years now. So it's been really good to like have that community with her and have community with the people that we both know that we mutually know together to really just like propel us into the next to the next phase of our lives. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really happy that I have Nia and other people like her for sure.
Yo, like that's such a good place to end. But I will ask, what are you working on now? And what is next for
Not
you?
working on now would actually be the question, because it's a million
Come
things.
through.
I'm trying to get book 2 of the Blood Trials cranked out. I have some really good twisty things, bloody things in store for my girl. We gotta fight a whole war. That's what I'm working on. I'm working on a couple of YA and MG projects. I can't really talk about a whole lot right now, but hopefully in the future I can talk about them more. So good things are in the works there. And just on a personal note, one dream that I have, and I hope to like launch it towards the end of 2021. I don't think I've talked about this yet publicly, so you guys are the first to hear this goal. But how you see the book packagers like I don't know, Dovetail and Cake Literary and Glasstown. One of my goals is to eventually helm my own book packaging company where I'm creating ideas and content and pairing authors with works focusing on stories created by us and for us, and trying to like match those with editors and imprints and get those out in the world. So that's what I'll be working on from now until when it all comes together. And
That is incredible.
So what I'm working on is I'm working on Cameron, like as Nia working on her sequel, I'm working on Cameron Battle Book 2 right now, which is a hot mess because trying to write a sequel in like a month and a half, like because like after that, how you once you sell the book, it's just like it goes quick after that. It's like you can't even get beta readers because it's like everything is just so fast. So trying to write a book in a month and a half, 2 months has been really, really tough for me. So that's what I'm working on now. I'm working on a rom-com right now. I have an idea for a rom-com right now. Then I off there maybe wink, 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 maybe some movie things coming down the pike soon with me. I may be able to write the screenplay for, so I'm like really excited for that. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now.
Oh my God, we're so honored to have you both here. This is incredible because you're just about to be in the public eye in ways none of us can even begin to imagine. We call it into existence for you. Your lives are about to change forever, and you're about to change so many lives forever. So we're very grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being here with us.
no, thank you. I'm
for having
honored
us.
that you all reached out and invited me. This was so incredibly amazing, and just thank you for allowing me to share the space with you all.
Of course, of course. Okay, LP, I think we can stop recording here and then just move to gallery.